Wyoming Territory, late spring of 1870, for the wind smelled like dust and gun oil, and Elira Jennings ran for her life through the dry blood-red dust of Sweetwater County, her arms wrapped tight around a swaddled baby boy. The sun was high, burning down on the packed dirt of the auction yard behind her. Shouts rang out, rough boots pounded the ground, but she did not look back. She could not. Her bare feet slapped the ground, skirts tangled around her knees, breath sharp in her throat. The baby whimpered, his tiny face pressed to her collarbone. "Please, please stay quiet," she whispered, ducking behind a wagon wheel as she reached the end of the yard. Her chest heaved, and she pressed a hand to the baby's back, feeling the desperate rhythm of his heartbeat against her own. "We are almost free." They had tried to sell her, like cattle. She had stood on the block as the man she once called Master Rourke shouted numbers, holding the baby in her arms. She had not known what they would do with the boy. Take him, sell him, throw him aside. She did not wait to find out. Elira had spent 21 years on Rourke's Georgia plantation before war freed her in name, but not in truth. When Reconstruction fell apart, he packed up and headed west to Wyoming, bringing his property with him. Or so he thought. But Elira had other plans. The baby stirred again. She shifted him higher and kissed his cheek. His name was Daniel. She had named him after her father, long buried beneath red Georgia clay. She was not his mother by blood, but she had held him since the day he was born to a girl too broken to stay alive. Elira had promised that girl she would protect him. She peeked around the wagon. A man was coming down the road from the north, riding easy in the saddle, reins loose in one hand. His horse clopped steady and calm, like he had nowhere to be and time to spare. He wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes, and his shirt was sun-bleached from hard work. A rifle rested across his saddle horn. Elira stepped back, heart pounding harder. She turned the other way and froze. 2 men from the auction yard were coming fast behind her, yelling for her to stop, calling her by the number they had pinned to her dress. Not her name. Never her name. She ran. The baby started to cry. She sprinted out onto the road, dust flying up around her legs. And then she stopped dead. The cowboy had dismounted and now stood firm in her path, legs braced, hand on the revolver at his hip. "Ma'am," he said, voice low and steady, "you might want to tell me what's going on." She backed away, but the men behind her were almost there. "Please," she gasped, clutching the baby tighter. "Do not let them take him. Please." The cowboy looked past her at the men charging up the road. Then he looked back at her, eyes dark beneath the brim of his hat. "You trust me?" he asked. Elira blinked, confused by the calm in his voice. He stepped forward as the men shouted, demanding he move aside. "I asked you a question, ma'am. Do you trust me?" She nodded, breath catching. "Then get behind me."
She did.
The cowboy turned and faced the 2 men, one hand resting on his belt, the other hanging loose by his side. "This woman yours?" he asked, voice still even. "She ran from the auction block," the bigger man snarled. "She's property." "No such thing in this territory," the cowboy replied. "Not since '65. You want to test that? Go ahead and draw." The smaller man shifted, hand twitching toward his holster. The cowboy did not move. "I would not," he said, voice like cold steel. The man hesitated, looked at his partner. Then both of them backed off, muttering curses. "I will remember your face, stranger," the big man spat. "You will regret this." The cowboy tipped his hat. "You go ahead and try." They turned and stormed back toward the auction yard. Elira stood frozen behind him, the baby fussing now, sensing her fear. He turned slowly and looked at her. "You hurt?" he asked. She shook her head. "Baby, he is just scared," she said softly. The cowboy reached out, gentle and slow. "May I?" She hesitated, but then let him touch the edge of the blanket. His fingers brushed Daniel's cheek. The baby blinked up at him and hiccuped. "What is his name?" he asked. "Daniel." He nodded once. "I am Isaac Sutton." "Elira Jennings." They stared at each other for a moment. Then she remembered herself and stepped back. "I am sorry. I did not mean to cause trouble. I could not let them take him." Isaac nodded. "You did right." She looked up at him, eyes rimmed with red, dust streaking her face. "Where can I go?" He studied her for a long moment. "I have a place, just west of here. You will be safe there." Elira swallowed hard. "Why would you help me?" He looked at Daniel again. "Because no one else did." She followed him. They rode double on his horse, Daniel cradled in her arms. The trail cut through low hills and sagebrush, the sky wide and endless. Elira did not speak. She watched the land pass, her grip tight on the baby and the man who had stepped between her and a cage. Isaac's ranch was quiet. A small house, a barn, a split-rail fence with a few cows in the pasture. A life of solitude, shaped by calloused hands and hard-earned peace. He helped her down, took Daniel while she steadied herself. She watched as he cradled the baby in his arms like he had done it before. "You have children?" she asked. "No," he said. "But I had a little brother once." Inside, he gave her water, food, place to sit. She ate like someone who had not in days because she had not. Night fell slowly. The baby slept in her arms, and she sat by the hearth, watching the fire flicker. Isaac moved quiet around the house, boots soft on the floorboards. Finally, he sat across from her. "You can stay," he said, "as long as you need." Elira looked at him, the words heavy in her chest. "Thank you." He nodded. They sat in silence, the kind that settled deep and warm. Daniel stirred, then fell back asleep. Elira looked across the room at the cowboy who had stood firm in her path. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years, she believed it might be her own. The morning light came through the cabin window in a hush of pale gold, casting a soft glow on the plank floor and the quiet bundle in Elira's arms. Daniel stirred but didn't wake, his tiny hand curled beneath his chin, breath warm against her collarbone. She hadn't slept, only dozed in fits, afraid that closing her eyes too long might undo what she'd found. Isaac came in from the yard with a quiet step, his boots leaving faint prints across the swept floor. He carried a bucket of well water and set it down beside the stove without a word. His shirt was damp at the collar, sleeves rolled past his elbows. His eyes flicked to her once, then back to the stove. "You want coffee?" he asked, not looking up. "I don't know when I last had any," she said. He poured water into a battered tin pot and set it over the fire. The smell came slow and rich, and she closed her eyes against it for a moment, letting it settle something inside her, something that hadn't felt steady in years. Isaac leaned on the edge of the table, arms crossed loosely, watching the flame. "You ever work stock?" he asked. She shook her head. "Didn't think so," he said. "But you're strong. That counts." She shifted Daniel to her other shoulder, wary of the direction the talk was drifting. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not." The words were said plain and without hesitation, and they sat between them a long moment. He poured 2 cups, handed her one. She took it with both hands, careful not to spill. The warmth seeped into her fingers. "You always live out here alone?" she asked. 3 years now. "Family?" "Dead, mostly. Some too far east to matter." She nodded, unsure what else to say. Isaac walked to the door and pushed it open, letting the breeze in. The pasture stretched beyond the fence, dotted with lean cows and early buds of prairie grass. "Got a few head that need checking," he said. "You stay inside today. Rest. I'll be back before noon." She watched him go, his stride purposeful, rifle slung across his back, a wide-brimmed shadow stretching long beside him. When the door shut behind him, the cabin held its breath. Elira sat in the stillness, sipping slowly, the coffee dark and bitter but oddly comforting. Daniel woke with a small start, fussing until she shifted him against her shoulder. By midday, he returned, dust on his boots and a streak of dried mud across his sleeve. He set a wrapped bundle on the table.
Eggs.
Couple biscuits. That neighbor girl down by the ridge keeps hens. Traded some jerky for it. She hesitated. You didn't have to. I know, he said. But I figured you were hungry. They ate quietly, the baby dozing nearby on a folded quilt. Elira picked at the biscuit with careful fingers. You said you had a brother, she said. Isaac's posture didn't change, but his voice did. It dropped low, quiet.
Ellie.
Younger by 6 years. He followed me into the war, wouldn't be told different. Died outside Vicksburg. She studied his face, the stillness behind his eyes. I'm sorry. He nodded once. Me too. She didn't ask anything more. He didn't offer. That afternoon, she stepped outside. The air smelled clean, warm with the scent of sun on dry grass. She laid Daniel in a wooden cradle Isaac had dragged down from the loft, and he slept there while she took a tin washed-about back and scrubbed the dust from her skin. Isaac returned from the far pasture just as she was rinsing her hair at the rain barrel, her back to the house, sleeves rolled and skirt pinned at the knees. He paused beside the fence, then turned away without a word. That night she cooked. Not much beans, a heel of bread, a little onion fried in lard, but it filled the cabin with a scent that felt like home, even if neither of them said so. Isaac took his plate and sat by the fire. She joined him after Daniel was down, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. I'll earn my keep, she said. I don't know cattle, but I can learn. I can cook, clean, sew. I didn't ask for that. I know, she said, but I want to. He didn't answer right away. Then we'll start with fence mending. Less forgiving than cooking. She smiled just a little. You saying my food's bad? I'm saying the fence doesn't talk back. Outside, coyotes called low across the flats. The wind moved through the grass like a hush. Isaac stood after a while and looked toward the door. You'll be safe here, Elira. She met his eyes. I believe you. He nodded, then stepped out into the night. She sat there a long time, watching the fire die down, her hands folded in her lap. The silence of the house felt different now. Not empty, just waiting. And for once, she wasn't afraid of what might come next. By the third morning, the sky came up with a hard edge, gray-blue and sharp as a knife. Elira stood in the lean yard behind the cabin, sleeves rolled, shoulders braced against the wind that pushed down from the foothills. Isaac had handed her a pair of thick leather gloves and pointed toward the north fence. You'll need to learn how to set a post straight first, he said, hammer slung over one shoulder. No sense patching a thing just to have it fall again come the first storm. She followed him across the pasture, Daniel strapped snug against her back with a sling sheet sewn from an old flour sack the day before. He didn't fuss much in the open air, lulled by the steady rise and fall of her steps. The fence had bowed in 2 places, the ground around it dry and cracked for months without good rain. Isaac knelt beside one post, unspooling wire with practiced hands. You ever hold a line taut? He asked. No, she answered, crouching beside him, but I can watch close. He passed her one end of the wire. Pull when I say. Don't stop till I tell you. She did, knuckles whitening as she gripped the line, boots dug into the dirt. He worked quick and sure, pounding the post into place, wrapping the wire just so. When he stepped back, it looked like it had always been there. Elira wiped sweat from her brow with the back of her sleeve. Where'd you learn all this? She asked. Isaac pulled off his gloves, squinting toward the ridge. Rancher outside Abilene took me on when I was 16. He didn't talk much, but he taught me how to keep something standing. She nodded, letting that settle between them. They moved down the line, working in rhythm. By midday, The sun broke through the clouds in thin bands, drawing long shadows across the field. Elira rolled her shoulders, fingers stiff from the wire. "You ever think of leaving?" she asked. Isaac paused, one boot braced against the post he was about to drive. "Used to," he said. "Thought maybe I'd go south, see the ocean. But the land held me. Guess I liked making something stay put." She looked past him to the hills, the pale green of new grass just starting to show. "I never stayed anywhere long enough for the ground to remember me." He glanced over, eyes unreadable. Maybe it's time it did. They didn't speak again until the fence was finished. That evening, Elira set Daniel down in the cradle and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. Isaac had gone to the barn to see about a calf born 2 nights before. She followed the sound of lowing cattle and found him kneeling beside the pen, one hand resting lightly on the calf's flank. He glanced up when she approached.
"Cold night," he said.
She stepped beside him, watching the calf stir.
"He's strong," she said.
"His mother near didn't make it," Isaac replied. "But he came quick. Sometimes that's enough." She leaned against the stall, watching his hand move slow over the calf's hide. "You ever think of marrying?" she asked, voice steady. He looked up at her, brow furrowed. "Didn't see the sense in building something if I couldn't keep it safe." She met his gaze. "You kept us safe." The barn felt close then, warm with hay and the quiet breathing of livestock. Isaac rose, brushing dust from his knees. "I'm not a man who talks pretty," he said. "But I'd see you stay, Elira. Not just for shelter." She held his eyes. "And I'd stay. Not for safety, but for you." He reached for her hand, calloused fingers wrapping gently around hers. Outside, the wind died down. The sky cleared enough to let the stars show. Inside the barn, they stood still, hand in hand, the space between them gone quiet like trust settling into place. And neither of them moved to break it. The river behind Isaac's homestead ran shallow that spring, cutting a soft line through the cottonwoods and sage like it never meant to do harm. Elira stood on the bank with her skirts pinned high, Daniel asleep in the sling against her chest, and a basket of damp linens balanced on her hip. The breeze smelled of willow and turned earth, and for the first time in years, she didn't flinch at the sound of footsteps behind her. Isaac stepped into view with a coil of rope slung over his shoulder and a patch of dried blood on his shirt cuff. "You hurt?" she asked, shifting the basket higher. He shook his head. "Yearling caught me in the gate. Fool thing spooked at a bird and took the whole latch with him." She studied the cloth darkening against his shirt. "You'll need to clean that before it festers." He dropped the rope and crouched beside her. "I've had worse." "That doesn't mean it won't turn." Isaac looked up at her, then down at the sling. "He sleeps light." "He's listening," she replied, brushing a hand over the baby's back. "He always does when the air changes." He nodded toward the trees. "There's a place upriver. Shallow enough to wade, deep enough to soak a bad day out of your bones. You feel like walking?" She hesitated, glancing at the sinking sun. "Won't be long before it's cold. I'll build the fire hide night." She shifted Daniel's weight and followed him along the river path. The cottonwoods thinned as the water curved inward, catching late light in its shallows. He stepped ahead, boots slipping once on the mossed edge, but caught himself without a word. When they reached the bend, he unrolled his sleeves and dipped them in the water, scrubbing at the dried blood with slow, careful movements. "You ever think about going east?" she asked, her voice quiet above the current.
"No," he said.
"You?" She shook her head. "There's nothing east but what I already lost." He wrung out his sleeve and sat back on the bank. "You believe in starting over?" "I believe in surviving what came before," she answered. "Starting over's just what comes after." Isaac picked up a flat stone and turned it over in his hand. "You think that's enough?" "Surviving." "It has to be," she said. "Otherwise we're just ghosts walking through someone else's story." He didn't speak for a while. The sky turned lavender, the first bats dipping low across the water. "I've been thinking," he said, voice steady, "about what it means having someone here. You and Daniel." She watched him closely. "You regret it?" He met her eyes.
No.
"I look around now, and things feel held together, like the land's got a heartbeat again." She sat beside him, the basket set aside, her legs stretched out on the cool grass. "I've been waiting for someone to say a thing like that and mean it." He didn't reach for her, didn't move closer, but the quiet between them shifted, became something less like distance and more like understanding. "Is this what peace feels like?" she asked. "Feels like something that don't need explaining," he said. Daniel stirred once, then stilled again. They stayed until the sky went dark and the stars came out clear and sharp above the ridge. When they walked back, Isaac carried the basket, and Elira kept one hand on his arm, just enough to steady her in the dark. Inside, the fire was already built high like he'd promised. She laid the baby down, then turned to find him standing by the hearth, watching the flames. "Elira," he said, voice low. She stepped close. "I don't know what's ahead," he said. "But if it's you and me and that boy, I'll take it." She touched his hand, rough and warm. "Then it's us," she said. "And we make it ours." They stood there, the light flickering over their faces, and the quiet that came wasn't heavy or cold, it was full of the kind of promise that didn't need words. The wedding was quiet, held beneath the cottonwood tree near the river bend, where the grass grew higher than a man's knee, and the wind carried the scent of wild mint. Isaac had trimmed his beard, and Elira wore a pale blue dress stitched from muslin traded in Green River, her hair gathered at the nape of her neck with a ribbon the color of new corn. Reverend Whitlow from the Foothill Chapel read from a small, leather-bound Bible, his voice soft enough not to wake Daniel, who sat in the crook of Elira's arm, his thumb tucked in his mouth. No guests, just the three of them and the land that had watched them come together. When Isaac took her hand, it was with a steadiness that needed no grand words, only the quiet promise of a man who had stood beside her every day since that first one. "You've carried yourself through fire," he said after the Reverend stepped back. "You don't need anyone to save you. But if you'll have me, I'll walk beside you the rest of the way." Elira touched his cheek with the backs of her fingers, her voice low. "I've known chains and I've known silence. You gave me neither. You gave me room to be. That's more than I ever dreamed of." The Reverend offered a nod, then faded into the trees, his horse waiting just beyond the clearing. Isaac wrapped an arm around Elira's waist and kissed her slow, his hand splayed across the small of her back, the baby between them with one fist pressed against his mother's collar. The breeze stirred the leaves above, and the sun caught the ring on her finger's simple brass, worn smooth. They walked back to the house as shadows lengthened across the field, Isaac carrying Daniel and Elira's hand resting lightly on his back. Smoke curled from the chimney. The door stood open. That night, she cooked rabbit stew with onion and rosemary, and Isaac brought in a bottle of blackberry wine from a crate he'd kept hidden in the barn loft, one of the last things his father had bartered before the war. They drank from mismatched tin cups, laughing when Daniel grabbed at the spoon and nearly overturned the whole pot. Later, after the dishes were set to soak and the baby lay swaddled in his cradle, Elira stepped out onto the porch and leaned against the post, watching the moon rise over the hills. Isaac came up behind her, sliding his arms around her waist. She leaned back into him, their bodies fitting together like they'd been shaped by the same wind. "You ever think it'd be like this?" he asked. "No," she said. "But I hoped." He kissed her shoulder, then rested his chin beside hers. "I've known cold winters and dry years, but I never knew stillness like this. Not the kind that stays in your bones." She turned in his arms and looked at him, one hand resting over his heart. "Then we hold on to it. We build something that lasts." They shared a bed that night, not out of need or urgency, but from the slow, deep certainty that had been growing between them since the first day. She ran toward him in desperation, and he chose to stand still. The months that followed brought work. Fences to reinforce, a new pen for the chickens, smokehouse repairs before the first frost. Elira sewed new curtains for the front window and patched Isaac's shirts with firm, even stitches. She kept a small garden behind the barn: beans, squash, a patch of corn. Isaac taught her how to read the sky, how to spot a sick cow before it showed signs, how to dig a post hole proper so the wind wouldn't take it. She taught him how to tell when Daniel's cry meant hunger and when it meant he just wanted to be held. In late summer, she woke before dawn, nausea curling in her belly. She knew the signs, had seen them enough in the quarters back east. She waited until the morning was full and bright, until Isaac came in from checking the stream bed. When she told him, he didn't speak right away. Just pulled her close and kissed the top of her head, then pressed his palm to her stomach like he was listening for something already stirring. By winter, her belly had begun to swell gently beneath her apron. Daniel had learned to stand, gripping the edge of the table and babbling at the dog. Isaac carved him a wooden horse with a crooked leg and painted it with leftover barn red. Elira laughed when Daniel drooled all over it. On the first snow, they sat by the fire, the baby asleep between them, her head on Isaac's shoulder. He ran his hand over her hair and said, "I never thought I'd have a home again. But here it is. You gave it to me." "You gave it to me first," she whispered. The snow fell in soft hushes all night long, blanketing the roof, the pasture, the trees. In the morning, Daniel pressed his face to the window, wide-eyed, and Elira wrapped him in a quilt and carried him outside to show him the world turned white. Isaac joined them, lifting the boy high into the air with both hands, the sun catching on the child's dark curls. Elira watched them with one hand resting lightly on her growing belly, peace rising in her like warm water. Years passed. The house grew a second room, then a front porch wide enough for a rocking chair. Daniel learned to ride, then to read, sitting on the floor beside Elira while she traced words with his finger. Their daughter was born in early spring, strong-lunged and dark-eyed, and Isaac wept when he first held her. Neighbors came to help raise a barn, to share bread and cider in the fall. Elira sang while she worked, her voice carrying over the fields. Isaac's hair turned silver at the temples, his hands slower but no less certain. When they sat together in the evenings, her hand always found his. Fingers twined, steady and sure. They never spoke of the day they met, not because they had forgotten, but because it lived in everything they built. In the rows of corn, in the cradle worn smooth, in the quiet way he always stood between her and the wind. And in the end, when their children were grown and the porch sagged just a little with age, they still sat side by side in the rocking chairs Isaac built the winter after their first harvest. Still holding hands. Still home.